One sentence. That was all it took to turn my family's perfect party into chaos. I leaned close to my sister's ear, whispered a secret, and in an instant her face froze, drained of color. Around us, laughter stumbled, conversations faltered, and whispers slithered through the room like smoke. The music kept pounding, but beneath it, I heard something louder, the snap of trust breaking in real time. That was the moment I understood. After tonight, nothing in my family would ever look the same again. Before I take you deeper into this story, please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe my channel for more stories like this one straight to you. My name is Emily Clarke, and I'm 32 years old. That evening was supposed to be harmless, just another family get-together filled with food, laughter, and empty small talk. Instead, it became the night that taught me how fragile loyalty becomes when money enters the room. By the end of it, I couldn't decide what pounded harder, the bass from the speakers or the rush of my own heartbeat. The very next morning, my phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Missed calls stacked up, texts poured in, and it seemed like every relative suddenly needed something from me. But none of them knew the truth. Not yet. What I whispered that night was only the beginning of a storm I had planned for months. And as I replayed each look, each word, each greedy smile, I realized that this wasn't just about money. It was about exposing who my family really was when the mask slipped. Before that weekend, my life in Albuquerque looked steady on the outside, but underneath it was cracking like dry desert ground. To most people, I was just a 32-year-old elementary school teacher guiding restless second graders through spelling tests, math drills, and playground drama. But behind every patient smile was exhaustion. My paycheck stretched so thin it barely covered rent on my tiny one-bedroom near the Rio Grande. Each morning, I brewed the cheapest coffee I could find while refreshing my bank app, praying I hadn't dipped into overdraft again. My 12-year-old Toyota Corolla rattled like an old washing machine, and every time I turned the key, I whispered a quick prayer that it would start. The last repair bill had already wiped out the little savings I had. Family made everything worse. My father, James Clarke, had remarried Pamela Hart, a woman who loved expensive wines, weekend getaways, and status symbols, but who never considered me part of her picture-perfect world. My mother, Susan, found her footing with Roger Bennett, a real estate agent who treated money like a fortress wall. My older brother, Thomas, 36, wore the mask of a budding tech entrepreneur, but his startups always ended in desperate calls for cash. My younger sister, Danielle, 28, was the family star married to Mark Taylor, a surgeon with a flawless online life in a gated community. The aunts completed the picture. Aunt Diane Moore, my mom's sister, lived quietly in a condo filled with secondhand books and herbal teas. She had heart problems, but her warmth never wavered. She checked in on me, sent birthday cards, and never once asked for anything. On the other side was Aunt Corinne Wright, my dad's older sister, who had married into wealth and never let us forget it. Her daughter Emily Wright was all smiles in person, gossiping over coffee. But I later learned she funneled every word back to her mother like a loyal informant. My history with family money was nothing but scars. I gave Thomas $3,000 for a business emergency, only to see photos of him skiing in Aspen. Danielle borrowed $1,500 for a baby nursery, swearing repayment after her promotion months later. Silence. James asked for $2,000 after a storm damaged his home, but then posted Caribbean cruise photos with Pamela. Susan borrowed $500 for her boutique shortfall, promising it was temporary, but Roger turned up with new golf gear instead. Each request had its own excuse. Each broken promise, its own sting. The only true constant in my life was Christina Long, my best friend from college. Over cheap wine at her apartment, she reminded me I wasn't crazy. "Emily, you can't keep being their bank," she'd say, her voice steady. At work, there was Brian Kelly, a kind colleague with a quiet crush. He often brought me lunch or covered playground duty, but I kept him at arm's length. I didn't need more complications. My only indulgence was a Friday ritual, buying lottery tickets at John Adams's corner store. John, in his 60s, always chatted about the weather or local news as I handed over $10. My family mocked me. Susan called it foolish. Thomas joked I should just hand him the money. James lectured me on probability. But to me, those slips of paper were more than numbers. They were a flicker of freedom, a chance to imagine something different. And little did I know, one of those tickets would soon tear everything wide open. But my birthday Friday started like a curse I couldn't shake. By mid-morning, one of my second graders had a meltdown so loud it rattled the classroom windows. During lunch, instead of eating, I hunched over a pile of math papers, my stomach growling as parent complaint emails filled my inbox. By the final bell, my head throbbed, and I felt like I had aged 10 years in a single day. As I gathered my things, Brian Kelly leaned against my door with that worried smile of his. "Emily, you look exhausted. Coffee after work?" he asked gently. I appreciated the kindness, but I waved him off. I didn't have the energy for his crush, not today. Instead, I drove straight to John Adams's corner store, my safe little ritual. John, always cheerful behind the counter, gave me a knowing nod. "Tough week again, Emily?" "The usual," he asked, already reaching for my ticket. I nodded, but on a whim, I added, "Give me one more this time, I'll pick my own numbers." He raised his eyebrows, but printed it anyway. I stared at the slip in my hand and carefully chose the numbers, my own birthday. My mother's, my father's, Aunt Diane's, and Christina's. John glanced at it and chuckled softly. "Those look familiar. Your grandma used to play numbers like these. She always had stories about an inheritance that went missing." His words lingered strangely in my chest. I laughed politely, but as I left, the thought gnawed at me. Had Grandma really left money that disappeared? That evening, I ordered takeout Mexican food, opened a bottle of wine Christina had given me, and flopped onto my couch. The lottery drawing played on TV at 8, but I barely noticed. My attention was on my phone, scrolling through endless family posts. Danielle's polished pictures of her kids, Thomas boasting about another successful pitch, and Corinne showing off her European vacation. My irritation was interrupted when the first number flashed on the screen. It matched. I leaned closer. The next one matched too. My pulse quickened. The third, another match. My breath caught, and I froze as the fourth lined up. My wine glass trembled in my hand, and when the final number appeared, my heart slammed against my ribs. All 5 were mine. I checked the ticket 3 times. I compared it against the screen until the numbers burned into my eyes. My hands shook so violently that I dropped my phone on the floor. There was no mistake. I was the sole winner of $15 million. That night, sleep never came. I paced my small apartment, the winning ticket glowing on the kitchen table as if it were radioactive. $15 million. Even after taxes, it would come down to around 30 million, a number so large it didn't feel real. My mind spun with what-ifs. I searched online for lottery winners, hoping to find happy endings, but article after article screamed cautionary tales. Families torn apart by greed, friends turning into enemies, winners bankrupt and miserable within years. One headline etched itself into my brain: "The lottery is the fastest way to lose everything you love." By dawn, I had made my choice. I would claim the prize, but no one, absolutely no one, could know. Not my father James, not my mother Susan, not even Christina. I needed time to protect myself before the wolves circled. That morning, I called in sick for the first time in months, muttering something about migraines. The truth wasn't far off. My head was pounding from the weight of the secret. I drove downtown to a sleek glass building where David Cole, a financial attorney, ran his practice. Sitting in the waiting room, clutching my purse with the ticket tucked inside, I felt like an imposter among men in polished suits and women with designer bags. My hands were clammy when the receptionist called my name. David greeted me warmly, a man in his 50s with gray streaks in his hair and sharp, assessing eyes. When I slid the ticket across his desk, his brows lifted just slightly before he composed himself. He verified it carefully, then leaned back in his chair. "Congratulations, Emily. I see why you came here quietly. His tone was steady, professional, but his eyes said he'd seen this story before. Over the next hour, he mapped out a plan. First, I could claim the money through a blind trust, keeping my identity private. Then, he explained the taxes, federal and state cuts that would bring it down to roughly $30 million. Finally, he laid out strategies for investments, diversified stocks, bonds, real estate. He spoke with calm authority, as if he were drawing blueprints for my future. But before I left, he gave me a warning. The biggest pitfall isn't strangers or scams, he said, his voice dropping lower. It's family. I've seen people destroyed because their relatives stop seeing them as human. They see a resource, a wallet, a solution. And once that happens, it's almost impossible to go back. I nodded, a chill running through me. His words didn't just echo my fears, they confirmed them. When I walked out of David Cole's office, the folder in my hands felt heavy, but not as heavy as the secret pressing against my chest. The money was real, secure behind trusts and legal walls, yet it didn't feel like victory. It felt like exile. I drove home in my beat-up Toyota, gripping the wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white, forcing myself to pretend everything was still normal. Pretend rent was still late. Pretend bills were still drowning me. Pretend I was still the family ATM. That night, I met Christina Long at our favorite casual restaurant. Between bites of nachos, I let the truth slip, though not all of it. I won, I whispered, leaning across the table. Her eyes widened, her fork clattering onto her plate. Emily, that's amazing. So, what now? Her joy felt genuine, and for a moment, I wanted to collapse into it. But then I explained the idea forming in my mind. I want to test them, I said. Christina blinked, confused. Test who? She asked, though she already knew my family. For years, I had been the one giving $3,000 for Thomas, $1,500 for Danielle, $2,000 for Dad, $500 for Mom. Money vanished into silence, promises dissolved into thin air. I need to know who they are when I have nothing, I told her. Christina frowned, her lips pressing into a thin line. Emily, that sounds manipulative, but she also knew me well enough to understand. Talking hadn't worked. Begging hadn't worked. This was the only way. So she leaned forward and said, if you're set on this, we have to make it airtight. Together, we built the plan. At the upcoming family party, I would reveal a fake lottery win worth $1 million. I'd watch their reactions, then claim the ticket was stolen. After that, I'd tell them I desperately needed $4,000 for rent, for medical bills, for survival. Christina helped me craft the details. A sudden audit at school. Doctor's tests for migraines. My exhaustion, my fear. Every lie rehearsed until it slid off my tongue like truth. We stayed at the table for hours, role-playing conversations, predicting responses. Thomas would promise to help, then disappear. Danielle would plead poverty. James would lecture. Susan would deflect. And Karen would judge. Emily Wright would spy. Each prediction felt like a scar I already carried. When I finally stepped into the night, the air smelled of rain, heavy and expectant. The family party loomed ahead like a storm cloud ready to break, and I was walking straight into it with thunder in my pocket. The party took place at Aunt Karen Wright's grand suburban home, her pride and joy. The house looked less like a place to live and more like a stage set immaculate hedges, polished floors, a backyard perfectly arranged for display. I arrived early with a dish of enchiladas, hiding nerves behind a practiced smile. The air smelled of grilled burgers. Laughter rose and fell in waves, and children tore across the lawn. Their shrieks slicing through the evening heat. Thomas stood near the patio, bragging about an investment idea to Roger Bennett, who only half listened. Danielle's children darted around while she scrolled endlessly on her phone. Then came Pamela, dressed in a sundress brighter than the setting sun, her lips curling as her gaze landed on my dented Toyota outside. Emily, you really should upgrade that car, she said with a laugh sharp as glass. Roger grumbled about traffic, as if the 15-minute drive had been torture. My parents arrived next. James extended a stiff handshake to Roger, while Susan gave me a quick hug, her questions about work clipped and shallow. Aunt Corinne moved around like a commander, barking orders about food placement, criticizing the spread as if the fate of the evening depended on it. Emily Wright, her daughter, hovered close, her smile sugary but her eyes always flicking toward my phone. Hungry for information. Then came Mark Taylor, Danielle's husband, slapping Thomas on the back like an old pal. Though his eyes narrowed when Danielle laughed too easily at Brandon Chen's jokes, the charming real estate flipper who had shown up unexpectedly. Even Roger joined in, ribbing Mark about competition, feeding the tension. As twilight deepened, I pulled Danielle aside near the picnic table, my hands trembling. "I have to tell you something," I whispered, slipping the fake $1 million ticket into her view. Her eyes widened and she gasped, her face lighting up like fireworks. "Are you serious?" she breathed, snatching it from my hand. Let me look at it closer. Without hesitation, she tucked it into her pocket and walked briskly toward the house, muttering something about the bathroom. She never came back. I forced myself to mingle, smiling thinly while my stomach twisted. Minutes dragged into eternity. Then I caught Cousin Emily whispering to Aunt Corinne, both of them glancing at me with smirks too sharp to hide. Soon Pamela was murmuring to Roger, and the whispers spread like fire on dry brush. The test had begun, and already the masks were slipping. The next morning, my phone erupted with calls and texts. 30 missed calls by sunrise. Danielle's frantic voice filled my voicemail. "Emily, did you find it? You need to call me right now." Mark's message was worse, his booming laugh hiding a threat. "If you don't share it, I'll just throw it away. Half for the family, Emily, be smart." Even Aunt Corinne left a voicemail dripping with condescension, lecturing me on how careless I was. Pamela and Roger sent a cold text. "Sorry, Emily, maybe downsize your apartment. You can't expect us to clean up your mistakes." I pushed the test further. I told them the ticket had been stolen and that I now needed $4,000 to cover rent and urgent medical bills. My father answered with a sigh already in his voice. "Emily, I always told you to be careful." When I explained, he launched into a lecture about responsibility. Then he slipped. "That's what your grandmother's inheritance was supposed to be for." My heart lurched. "What inheritance?" I pressed. His words faltered. "It was complicated." For family investments, his defensiveness told me everything I had been robbed years ago. I called my mother. She sounded distracted, her voice muffled by Roger in the background. "Oh, Emily, that's awful. Did you ask your dad?" We just sank money into the boutique expansion. When I mentioned the inheritance, her voice tightened like a knot. "That money was handled years ago." But her shaky tone betrayed her. Thomas responded instantly to my text. "That's terrible. I'll see what I can do." Then nothing. Just silence, like always. No follow-up, no offer, just a hollow promise. Aunt Corinne was harsher. "Emily Wright told me you were careless. I've said for years teaching isn't stable. You should have chosen something smarter." When I asked for help, she scoffed, dismissing me as if I were a child begging for candy. Later, I saw the texts Emily Wright had sent her during the party, mocking me and reporting every detail like a loyal spy. Danielle and Mark were no better. Mark texted, "Sorry, we can't. Kids' school fees are killing us." Danielle called later, her voice syrupy sweet. "I'm so sorry, sis. Maybe the ticket will turn up." But the memory of her slipping it into her pocket the night before was too sharp. By the end of the week, I had a notebook full of excuses, betrayals, and lies. Each rejection was another knife. And just when despair started to suffocate me, my phone lit up with one unexpected name, Aunt Diane. When I picked up, Aunt Diane's voice was calm, full of concern. "Emily, honey, I just wanted to check in. Are you okay?" No judgment. No greed, just care. The next morning, we met at a diner near her apartment, the kind of place with cracked vinyl booths and endless coffee refills. She looked tired, her sweater plain, her scarf mismatched. But when she saw me, her eyes lit up with warmth. "Over pancakes. I told her the fake story about the stolen ticket and needing for $1,000. Without hesitation, she reached into her purse and pulled out an envelope. She slid it across the table, her hand trembling. "It's $2,500. It's most of what I've saved, but it should help with rent. Don't worry about paying it back until you're steady." My throat closed. She had so little, yet she offered everything. I broke. Tears streamed down my face as I confessed the truth. "Aunt Diane, I didn't lose anything. I won $50 million. The fake ticket was a test. I needed to see who would stand by me." Her eyes widened, but she didn't interrupt. She let me pour it all out: the lies, the party, the betrayals. When I finished, she reached for my hand. "Emily, you didn't need to test me. You've always had my love." Then she told me her own truth. Grandma had left an inheritance $20,000 for me and my siblings. James had funneled it into a failed project with Pamela. Susan had stayed silent to avoid conflict. "I wanted to tell you," Diane whispered, "but they pushed me out." Her words confirmed everything. Yet instead of rage, I felt clarity. My family had chosen their path long ago. Now I had to choose mine. Over the next year, I cut ties completely. No more calls. No more texts. No more fake apologies. When Thomas begged for business money, I ignored him. When Danielle invited me to a reunion, I left it unread. When James faced car repairs, I stayed silent. My peace was worth more than their approval. With David Cole's guidance, I set up a trust to cover Diane's medical bills and bought her a comfortable single-story home. Watching her smile as she planted herbs in her garden felt better than every dollar in my account. Together with Christina, I started a nonprofit for struggling teachers and elderly folks like Diane. In the first year, we helped hundreds.